In my recent interview with Joy Hermsen, we covered a wide variety of topics and issues critical to entrepreneurs. Everything from finding mentors, to business survival tactics, to getting and giving feedback, to how training for triathlons applies to entrepreneurship. Joy's experience in business and as an educator teaching entrepreneurship and innovation really shine through in this interview. Joy, welcome to Fill the Boot.
It's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And just so everyone knows who you are, why don't you give us just like a minute or two on your background?
So I am the Statewide Director for Retail, Hospitality, and Tourism in the California Community College's Economic Workforce Development Division. Essentially, my job is to help tie what's happening in industry and retail, hospitality, and tourism alongside what's happening at the colleges, so that as students finish the programs, they have relevant skill sets, they can be a really useful workforce. And because so many businesses in retail, hospitality, and tourism are small businesses, are entrepreneurial, there's a lot of overlap. I also taught in entrepreneurship for many years in college at the Santa Rosa Junior College and ran the entrepreneurship program there. And I still get to hear all the great ideas that people have. It's really a lifelong passion I've had. My parents were immigrants. My mom was one of those, I think, hustlers would be the best way to put it. She worked 7 jobs. She was cooking out of her kitchen. She was helping people fund deals. I mean, she was just a deal maker. And she's been gone now about 5 years, but that legacy of just starting and helping and for this community of action to support economic growth, but also just the fun of it, that really came from her DNA. So I'm excited to be able to do the role that I have. I've worked in a lot of different roles, small companies, large companies, nonprofits, and it's really just fun to meet people like you and also share these resources of what do you need to start? There are a lot of people who want to see you succeed, and then you get to give back too when you succeed, and that's just it's a really great energy to have, be part of.
I think a lot of people don't realize the extent to which other people want to help them. They feel like it's such an imposition to ask for help or advice from potential mentors. But my experience is people are hungry to give back.
Yes, that's a good point. I mean, I know, for example, you've had a lot of success, and I wouldn't want to bother you because you clearly are a busy person, and I think all of us have this mindset. But if someone asked us for help, we would be more than happy to, whatever that looks like, whether it's a bounce an idea off of you or connect to someone who might help, or even find out about something you read about. It's a very lonely road. You know, the entrepreneurship road can be kind of isolating. And I think it's a great point you bring up, that remembering that people do want to help and that you would be that way too. That's half the fun of this. It's not just about trying to reach some, outcome or some financial goal. If you're all alone, what's the point? if the pandemic situation has made us appreciate anything, it's that we really crave real connections and the support. We've all been supported. None of us would be doing anything without just tons of people who've helped us, from teachers to coaches to, business colleagues or neighbors. And that's important to remember right now, because even if we can't see them, we can reach out and do more helping. So that's a good point to remind me of. Thanks, Lance.
Well, and I remember we talked when we were chatting a couple weeks ago about how that tied to networking and the kind of advice you give students about that.
Yeah. Networking is a bad word in a lot of people's books, right? It sounds like inauthentic connection in order to exploit what connection you might have and then use it. And maybe that's what it means to some people. But for me, it's about engaging and as you pointed out earlier, just reaching out to finding out how people might want to be asked to help. I think the other thing is, I noticed this when I helped run an event company for many years, and we would stage huge cycling events, and trying to get 2,500 people to do things voluntarily, it can be fun when it's fun and you feel like it's part of a greater good And this was raising money for at-risk kids, and it was an amazing cause. But what I found is there were lots of people with full-time jobs in, amazing professions, doctors and architects and, city workers, but they don't get this thing that they crave. And if we could give it to them when they were volunteering, which is a sense of fun, they got to lead in different ways. They got to work with people they never would have gotten to work with. And yeah, it wasn't great. Like, you're moving porta potties in the middle of the night in a site that's 100 miles from the city, but it matters. And it's going to matter to someone who's flown across the world to do this bike ride. There's this sense of purpose and maybe sharing that you're not going to get at your 9-to-5 job. And so when we're asked to maybe share of ourselves in a different way, I found people seem to be hungry for it, because it's unusual. It kind of meets the higher levels of your being that you don't get in your sort of day-to-day drudgery, which a lot of people just have. So I think there's a part of that there's a connection, even if it has nothing, it's seemingly nothing to do with entrepreneurship or community or even like accomplishment. There's so much powerful stuff that comes from working together, struggling, that shared struggle, even if it's just a finite thing, that people really want to find a way to make something happen, even if Absolutely. They don't have the guts to do something, big on their own. This is a way to do it. So yeah, I think that's the energy I just feel like I'm addicted to a little bit. In other words, when, like you were talking about your, mentoring many people this morning, just in your day today, it is so fun to just to listen and to kind of get the sense of what is trying to be what is trying to come to pass. And I think the other thing that's hard for people who are always trying to share these ideas is it feels like sometimes, what is in it for me, right? Why should I give you my time? People are worried about that. Or what are you going to take from me if I give you my time? And I think that sense of not thinking about it that way, but that sense of multiplicity, not scarcity, like the more we can share, the better it's going to be. I feel like that's something we need to remind people of too. And then it's not networking in the yucky sense. It's more real connection that only can get more good stuff that comes from it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of these things when you're giving back that it isn't a zero-sum game. It's not that I'm giving you something therefore I lose it. I mean, I find certainly mentoring, yes. I learned so much from the process of mentoring.
Yes.
And I'm interested in your first example being sort of volunteer organizations, because I think you don't think of that as mentoring, but I've met amazing people and had great opportunities through that. And the people who choose to give their time to those kind of activities are so motivated. They yes. are engaged and excited people. It's a self-selection process.
Yes. And I mean, I'm full disclosure, I used to be an HR director. And what would be funny, I wasn't in this role at the event company, but then I'd find great volunteers and then we'd have jobs. And the people that you remember are like, hey, I know you have a full-time job, but would you be interested in this little thing? We're looking at this project. And you find some great skill sets, or they're not available, but they know someone who's just as good. And so not only are we learning from them and learning from the experience, I do find great people. I'm not looking for them, right? But you make these really fantastic connections. And I think the other thing it taught us was volunteers are so enthusiastic about wanting to give of themselves that they'll find better ways to do things. Right. And so we may have had one system. In fact, at one time I had to reorganize the system for bike parking for 10,000 bikes, and it wasn't working one way. And we had this one volunteer who helped us map out a whole other project possibility. And then it was someone else who said, why don't you just have them park their own bikes? And it was and we thought about it, and we thought, well, these bikes are labeled, they're labeled, they can walk and park their own bikes. We'll just secure it. And it saved us thousands of dollars, and it saved 100,000 volunteer hours, and it worked fine. It was fine. But but it took someone thinking outside of the box to do that. And so to your point about learning, if we can just be open to some of this, we can really get a good lesson.
And really, it's a matter of numbers. The more people you talk to, the more people you share with the idea with. I listened to someone speaking recently, and they were saying, share what you're working on and what you need with everyone, not necessarily to ask them. It's like if you're talking to your dentist, say, yes, hey, let me tell you about my company. Here's what I'm working on, and I'm looking for this. And who knows, they might know an investor. They might know someone in tech. They might know a customer. You never know.
No, that's a great example. Dentists are one of the most connected people in the community. And they tend to have, also just in general, just that you mentioned that, they tend to have several side gigs that they're involved with.
That's right. Well, they're literally in everyone's face.
Yeah. And they're listening, right? I mean, I think that's the other piece. But I think too, it's good practice. I know, just like with any time we talk about telling people about your idea, the more you practice doing it in a way that maybe you're not thinking about it in a full suit in front of a stage of people with slides, you can really speak to it in different, I guess, two different types of audiences. I mean, I remember in business school, one of my favorite teachers was a statistic professor, and he said, if you can explain it to your grandma, that's when you understand it. And so you have to be able to tell your business idea to your grandma. And if she doesn't get it, then you got to keep working on it.
It's funny. I end up doing that a lot when I'm talking to people about their pitch, and they'll have some really complicated pitch and they're starting way in the weeds. And I'll say, well, stop. When you're at a cocktail party with your friends, how do you describe
how do you
this?
talk about this? Right.
Why don't we start from there?
No, it's true. And that's the part you can't practice anymore. There are no cocktail parties, right? You can't get that honest feedback of your friend going, what are you talking about? Let's get, or you being able to say, hey, we're just practice this with me in this way. So I think that's actually an interesting thing we should maybe explore, is having a forum where it's a cocktail party and you're just sharing your idea with us. Or even company names, some of the most terrible names have been pitched, and I'm thinking, this is not a good name for your company, but no one's told you. You've been doing it for a year now. Change the name. It sounds like a terrible medical procedure you get in the hinterlands of Russia. Like, please don't use this name. And I've, it's funny because it's that kind of, this kind of discussion where we would just be standing next to each other talking about it and going, have you ever thought about changing that name? Where
a lot of people don't want to hurt anyone's feelings.
Yes.
That honest feedback is hard to get. You do a pitch to your friends go, great, because they want to be encouraging.
Yes. But your real friends will be like, you're full of hoo-ha. No, don't call it that. No, but you're right. That is, family wants to be, the family wants to be supportive and gosh, but if you're so tied to the name, how are you going to get honest feedback on anything that really might matter? And like signing a deal that isn't a good one, or having a partner that maybe isn't the right fit in terms of values. I mean, you got to have, this is actually, Lance, we're talking about mentors and people wanting to help. It's not helpful if people aren't direct with you, right? And that you can't hear it. I think that's one thing I do see. But again, how do you practice that when you really can't be around people?
So when you've taught, how do you help students get into that mindset of hearing and listening to feedback?
That is a challenge. I mean, the students I've had have been all ages. I've had, students who are in their 60s. This is their third or fourth career. They're just kind of interested in testing out the waters. I've had students that are in high school that don't want to finish high school, actually just want to go after this one job, this idea. And that's really fun in the group. And so what I tell them is, in general, start thinking about a board of directors for your group. And that includes just I tell them like 5 people, right? You probably have a family friend or a neighbor or an old colleague, or if you're older, you need a finance mind. You need a legal mind. When you have a contract, who do you run it by? your brother-in-law's a lawyer. Okay, you have, whoever that is. You might have a marketing mind that somebody like, hey, I've come up with this great name for a product. What do you think about this, right? And then you kind of need someone who is a mentor that has done this stuff, or maybe is really. And in my case, I had a mentor who was a former supervisor, but had worked in building organizations, and so I kept him in my kind of personal board of directors. But then you need one person that's the no BS person. Like they will tell you, you shouldn't be XYZ, whatever it is, wearing that, or, dating that person. And not in a bad way. It's because they truly, truly love you and they know what you care about and they will tell you the truth. That's the most important person in this little group of mine. So I start thinking about that now. And if you don't have anyone that is that person, put me down as your first person on the board. And then, but I need you to come up with another honest person that's not me, because I will always be honest with you, but I also want you all to be that for each other. So the way I would do it in class is, let's all be each other's board of director, trusted sounding boards. And then they had to do so many presentations to each other. This was a really neat, the way it worked, the classroom was maybe 20 people. Everyone did it in the business canvas model. And every week you'd have to present some new part of that model. And if you didn't do such a great job or you had questions, the class would kind of do it with you, right? And come to, hey, have you thought about this, in a really kind way, because they knew they were the next one up and they were going to get that direct feedback. But over 16 weeks, you really build some trust. And so it isn't just like one meeting only and we're just throwing a bunch of junk at you and you may or may not take it. You come to have a community of peers. And so I started the class that way with, that's how I'm going to help you, because it's not helpful to get, no real information or no real feedback. Or like in the old days, we used to talk about the nice customer, right? The nice customer never complained, but then they never came again. And then your doors were shut. Whereas the pain in the neck customer would always tell you what was going on. And that was the person you should value, because they're giving you free consulting and you know what to change and how to get better. We don't need nice customers to just pretend like everything's hunky-dory. We need peers and colleagues who are really going to tell us the truth. And so that's how I would foster it. And you know what I would find is really interesting is I'd also say, tell people I'm the teacher and I'm the bad guy. So if you have to pitch an idea and you have to say, my teacher, she's kind of a tough one. And so she asked me to get feedback from my family. And she said, she's the bad guy. She wants you to be as honest as you can, as if you were giving her the feedback, as if it's not me. But here's the idea, right? And so somehow having kind of a shield that's not them personally. So they use that a lot. I'm like, oh, I used you as a bad guy because I told them how to work on my idea, which I did, and nobody was giving me the time. And I just said, my teacher's kind of a tough one and I need 4 hours to work on this. And then guess what? I got it. So
that is so funny. It was one of the things I learned as a manager and as a boss, was one of the most valuable things I did for my reports was give them permission to throw me under the bus.
Yes.
Right. If someone asks you to do something, you can say no. But maybe you can't say no yourself. Say I said no.
Yes.
I give you permission.
I had to. Yes. No, I think that's interesting, because I loved when I was listening to your first podcast about how you started it and the idea of Feel the Boot. I went back to, I had the opportunity to coach beginning women triathletes for a while in this business that I had. And what was funny was people would be like, oh, I just don't have time to work out. And I would say, why not? Well, my family needs me. And I was like, well, your family has to answer to me, because you're not going to finish the triathlon if your family doesn't let you do the training. And so that was, again, like, use the training as an excuse, use the coach as the excuse. If I don't do this, I won't finish, and I need you to help me finish. So somehow we need that permission. And I think it's harder for entrepreneurs to do that because there isn't anyone else, right? I mean, unless you're saying, oh, I've got to make this loan payment. I mean, it's harder for people to get a grasp of who the tough person is. But I
Well, the
think
board,
that's,
I think, can be helpful there as
yes,
well. And I love the fact that you're focusing on the board, because often people, I think, equate having a board, and it could be advisors, not directors, right? They don't have
right.
to have authority, but having some group of people that are outside the business, they're not inside the little bubble with you,
Yes.
but who are empowered to give you that really direct feedback, ask the hard questions, hold you to account on your commitments, is so valuable.
Well, and two, I think sometimes you, you don't want to keep talking to your significant other about the idea, or even your friends, but we just get so caught in the details sometimes, and it helps to kind of lift up and out. And then, as we started earlier today, just reminding ourselves that people want us to succeed, not just the people involved in the company, but people we care about, that we trust. I think I'm glad you liked the idea. It wasn't mine. It was an old colleague of mine, Dave, who actually told this to me years ago. I was managing a team of field folks, and I said, "What do you do to, to stay grounded?" Just curious, because this field rep jobs are tough, and you have 80 accounts in a huge territory, and I said, "Oh, I've always had a board of directors." My personal board of directors. And I thought, that's brilliant. How come we don't, and that's the other thing, how come we don't know these things? And actually, this is one of the things I really value about what you're doing, is so much of what we know is, it's tribal knowledge. And depending on your tribe, my mom, as I mentioned earlier, she was kind of a deal maker, but she had many rules. One was cash only. So somehow she managed to get all this property, but she couldn't get a credit card because she had no credit, on record. But you know what? Never went to debt, for things that didn't matter, and always seemed to have the means to help other people. And I just love that, I've told my daughters that. It's like, that's so interesting that was how. And real estate, cash only on all deals. As much real estate as you can get at the cheapest prices you can get, and then sell it at the highest price. I mean, that's it. That was like,
well, that sounds like secret. Business.
But she's, here she is. She was born in the 40s in the Philippines. Her mother died in childbirth with her younger sibling. She essentially raised her siblings. There were 8 kids, including her. Her dad was, destroyed from this death. And so somehow my mom knew that. I mean, she emigrated to the U.S. And my father was from the Philippines too. And he joined the U.S. Navy. So she came as a U.S. Navy wife. I think he said they got paid $85 a month. And they had one mattress that was their furniture when they moved here in 1967. And so, but somehow those business rules she got somehow. She figured it out.
So how did you go from your mother's kind of scrappy entrepreneurial background to then actually teaching entrepreneurial and innovation and things like that?
Oh yeah. I had the opportunity of going to school at UC Davis, and I have an MBA from the UC Davis school as well. But at the time, I got to go through the Sacramento Entrepreneurship Academy, which has been teaching young entrepreneurs since the mid '80s. And Jim Corbett and the founders helped essentially launch a weekend school for entrepreneurship before it was cool. It wasn't on any curriculum, it wasn't on any campuses at the time. And so we got to learn about how folks like Charlie Soderquist and Russ Solomon and a lot of the folks in the Sacramento region started their businesses and the lessons they learned. So I started teaching with that group actually as an alumna, and my area was always around the pitch, and so that was really fun to come back, and because they've had classes every year since the early '80s, still in existence, and so I ran training and development for a national restaurant chain, and also that morphed into being able to do business consulting. And we helped create, essentially at this chain, there were 200 franchisees, but there was no integrated system for getting them to do business planning. So we had really successful folks that had 20 plus, locations. And then we had people that were just a one unit franchisee, but didn't really have a plan for how to either grow what they were doing or expand. And so our team helped put together a business planning, essentially a process. And it was basic, mentoring. And for a lot of these folks who had bought themselves a job but didn't realize that they were actually buying into a business that they needed to think about and exiting. If it wasn't great, they needed to exit and let someone else have that location. And so that was really fun. And then I had the chance to work with the triathlon training business, which was an online training business in support of the Danskin Women's Triathlon Series. And so there were multiple races and there were multiple teams, over 30 teams across the country, and training first-time women triathletes to do a sprint triathlon. So I had never done a triathlon, even though I had done training and development and franchising before. So the first year I did 3, which is the slowest possible time you can ever do anything. I mean, the whole thing is finishing, right? It sounds so impressive. It's kind of like, but yeah, I mean, I backstroke the swim because I don't like to have my face in the water, I'll admit. But who's gonna fault me for that? Someone who hasn't done a triathlon? Let's go. I can take you on that anytime. And you're biking, it's fun biking. And then if you're tired when you're running, you walk. It's no big deal. So to me, it feels like one of those things that you can just try and you can accomplish it. And I feel like it's a lot of some of this that we're talking about is people are just really scared to try. It's intimidating. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and perseverance, just getting across the finish line. I remember when we had hard times at Anonymizer back around 2000 during the .com collapse. My partner and I started talking about the cockroach strategy, that, after the nuclear apocalypse, the cockroaches will still be there.
Right.
All
Absolutely.
we need to do is survive.
Yes.
The wheel will turn.
Yes.
But if you're not alive, you can't succeed. Like that's the...
No, we were just talking about that the other day. That's exactly right. I mean, that's what the most interesting thing about right now in this global pandemic and ensuing economic meltdown, that's it. And whatever people are needing to do that's important to talk about, because no one's gone through this. So all bets are off, right? I mean, it's sort of like what will work? We don't know. But trying to figure out when you're in your head alone, that's going to be really challenging, especially just how hard it is already to do everything just online and kind of in isolation. So I think I'm really glad you mentioned that, because there's real value in that lesson, that reminder, and that we will go on. We will continue.
And of course, every disruption creates opportunities too. A fire opens up open land, the grasses grow.
Yes.
I think it's very true. And even some of the companies I'm talking to, and I see a lot of them are having a hard time, but some of them are having unbelievable growth and success because of, the opportunities it's opened up.
Yes,
let alone
absolutely.
Zoom here.
I know. When we can't survive without it, as much as we make fun of it, right? We live by it. So yeah.
I can't imagine what this experience would have been like without these kinds of televideo and telepresence. It would have been much, much worse, more frustrating. For sure.
And we think about sales and relationship building and even just continuity of just some kind of flow. I think it would have been really impossible. Just with the phone, no.
I almost never talk on the phone anymore. It would just be hard to go back to that even at all.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask, having taught this stuff, how has that impacted your thinking about entrepreneurship? Listening to the students and seeing how they react to it.
It's so much fun. It is really fun to see kind of the aha moments. I have twins, and having twins was great because it's intense, but then, there's so much fun stuff that happens when that comes as they grow and develop. And my favorite part is when when students help each other get those aha moments. One student, Hannah, she had a catering business, and she brought product for us to try before she went to go to her first farmer's market. And everyone in class was like, "You're not charging enough money for this. How much do you want to charge for this? This is good." So she ended up changing her price point, but it's one of those, I couldn't have told her that. I mean, I could have, but it was much more meaningful. And then the other part that they did was they just said, "When are you going to be there?" And they started posting stuff, right? Like, so, "Hey, where are you going to be? Let me make sure. I'll make sure and go. And I'm going to tell my friends." And it just opened up this whole, like, oh, it's happening. It isn't just theoretical. And I think the things I learned about that is just, I'm not great at social media, but I really like the idea of sharing. And so I think it was a good reminder too, having folks do that, is there are people who love it and who are fantastic at it. And just like with any other skill set, I don't have to own all the skill sets, but I have to be honest about what I'm not great at and hire really good people to help with that. And I think that was another piece, was she was like, "I can't afford social media." It's like, yes, you can. Clearly, you can just bring some sample to students and they'll tell you, and it kind of took off from there. So I think every
so put your Instagram on the cookie wrapper, right?
Exactly. No, and she's done really well. And I think what's fun about that learning is that as they're giving that advice, they're noting, "Oh, I can do that." And I think that's the piece I really love about right now, and what kind of where we are is the egalitarian nature of where we are. There's some folks that are doing some great work to try to help people who've never heard any of this stuff before, learn more about how to be better business owners or how to start. And your blog is a great example of just democratizing the information. It's not rocket science, but it kind of is. You can really screw up if you don't know some basics, but it's also about, having fun with it and not being too tied with what you think the idea is versus where this collaboration can bring, these collaborative ideas can help bring you. Because she pivoted from having a restaurant to doing this other catering thing. And that was the right thing to do for her in terms of debt, in terms of name recognition. But so that's what I really love about having students, come with this. And I felt like all I ever did was sort of open the door, like, well, here are the concepts. And then pretty soon it was really, the learning was coming from them. One example was one gentleman I had worked in the wine industry forever, had many advanced degrees, and wanted to start a spirits line. And he had such great ideas. And it was fun to just kind of see him assimilate all the ideas from brands he had worked with that were great, and some that ideas were not so great. And then he would share that with the team, with the class, and then the class would give him ideas. Have you thought about, doing a collective of recipes with your spirits? And no, he had thought about bringing, the product to market. And so I think it becomes just that sense of it becoming more alive. And I think the other piece right now is, how are people engaging with it in a way that you're not driving? So if people are totally into recipes right now, in fact, just today, I was talking to the team that I have that helps me with our marketing outreach. And we were trying to come up with a way to maybe make some content we're putting out be of interest. We're essentially trying to say, hey, community colleges have some great resources for you. They're, really readily available. And someone's like, have you thought about doing a little menu that people could cook if they're in their dorm room? And then maybe that's how you tell them information. I was like, I had not thought about that, but that is not a bad idea, because it's useful, but also it's tied to the sector that we're in, right? And right. It's also, it was just fun. And I thought, see, I wouldn't have thought of that. I would have been doing my old timey.
Well, it's so easy to get tunnel vision where you're thinking down a particular line and someone coming in from the side. I thought it was really interesting what you were saying earlier, that one of the students gave some feedback and then would suddenly be like, that's actually great. I'm amazed how often
Yeah.
that happens as a mentor, and especially when I was still working full time, I'd be giving someone some advice, and this voice in the back of my head would start saying, "That's good advice, Lance. You should listen to it."
Yes, and that's where that learning does happen when we want to listen to it. No, that's awesome. Yeah.
So what do you think is the hardest part of this kind of entrepreneurial mindset and thinking to teach? Where do you see the students kind of having the biggest lift to get into that way of approaching things?
That's a good question. I think one we've already touched upon, which is that entrepreneurship is for someone else, right? It's someone else who's older, someone else who has more money, someone else who is more
Stanford
connected.
grad.
Right, yeah. And so there's that, first of all, which is, no, that's not true. But two, it's kind of like that triathlete, a triathlete analogy a little bit. You know, I wouldn't send someone off to run a triathlon if they didn't know how to swim, or if they were not comfortable on a bicycle, or if they didn't have the right equipment. And if you're a female, especially a beginning female athlete, maybe you've what we would call deconditioned. So maybe you haven't been doing a lot of conditioning in the past. And just mind you, a lot of our athletes would be folks who had a major birthday coming up. They were turning 60 and they'd never done anything like this. They wanted to do something. So, so when you're running as a new athlete, you need shoes that fit and you need a bra that fits you. These are very important things. So back to basics, if you don't have the very basic skills, you're not going to have a fun time doing a triathlon, and you also might hurt yourself. And I would say that's probably the hardest thing to explain to students is, while entrepreneurship possibly is for everyone, you need some basic skills in finance and in understanding, you know, revenue possibilities, partnerships. And that's where the business canvas model kind of helped give them the whole framework. And then that understanding too of what you are good at and what you can learn, and then what you can maybe go get help with, but being honest about knowing yourself, knowing what you really want to do and what you can do. That was I wouldn't say the hardest. People got it, but very few people, we just don't get taught that way. If you think about what you learned in school, I mean, what you learned in college even, and what you learned in business school or whatever else you did, no one says, who are you? Why are you doing this? And what are you really good at? Because you really shouldn't waste your time on the stuff that you won't do, don't want to do, and are no good at. And that sounds so kind of stupidly simple, but I feel like that's what I would try to do with folks is, let's take an inventory.
Yeah, you talked about when we talked a few weeks back, and I said, what's the top bit of advice? And you said, know yourself.
Yes. And I think, and be honest about that, right? So, I mean, I've tried to share with people, that's not because you have such a big head that you really want to only think about yourself, but when you're building a team of people who are going to help you take this idea forward, you need to know what your strengths are, and you need to not necessarily hire those strengths. You have those. You need the areas where you need help and where you can have a complementary skill set and a group of people who are also like-minded. Because it isn't just about, oh, we're interested in doing this idea. Is it really important for us? You know, is it a real value to have integrity, to have credibility, to show up, to work when it's not easy? Those are also, knowing yourself helps you figure out what's important in the people you bring on to share your idea. I mean, you're essentially getting married to them, right? So if you don't have like values, it's going to be a tough marriage, I think, a little bit.
That's right. Yeah, you're going to spend more time with these people over the next 4 years than your family.
Yes. Well, and
really critical.
Yeah. And I think, gosh, sometimes I think too, maybe, and young people maybe fall into this more than others. I don't know, maybe not. I've had students of all ages. we can kid ourselves into who we think we are because it's who we want to be. But if I feel like too, it's back to that explaining the idea to your grandma and essentially being honest with your grandma. If you can tell your grandma, here's what I bring to the table and I'm hiring this person or I'm asking this person to join me because there's what they bring. Your grandma can smell BS, right? And so I feel like there's almost like there has to be a place where you're saying, no, this is true. This is really it. And this is what I know, I believe I need to do. And this is what's going to take me forward. And I think maybe people have had more time to do that during the pandemic because there's more reflection time when you're by yourself. But I also want to balance that with, I see sometimes, at least with the younger folks, I'd say under 22 maybe, that are kind of afraid. They've seen a lot of hurt since 2008. They've seen family members struggle. There's a lot of, I have a lot of family members, nieces and cousins and, that kind of thing that are in this age group they're just afraid. They don't want to end up making a big mistake. And I appreciate that they're worried that way, but I also don't want this sense of, I can't do it. I don't believe that I have what it could take to do it. That's different than being afraid, right? So I want to have them balance knowing themselves with knowing what they really are capable of. And that makes it easier to assess the risks. I'm not going to have you jump off a bridge, right? I want you to be prepared.
I wonder if it's a little like the generation right after the Great Depression, where they were as a group very cautious and conservative
risk
about
averse.
these things. Well, and of course, it's like, any big investment, you never want to do something that's going to leave you in a, impossible situation.
Right.
Risks are okay, but suicide's not okay.
Right. And that's a great way to put it. I think also because one thing I noticed is that it's either black or white sometimes for folks. And I feel like, no. There are 100,000 right ways to do this. And then there is suicide, which is over there, which we don't want you to do. But just because the initial thing didn't work doesn't mean that it's not got value, right? And so sometimes people just turn it off, like, that didn't work, and I can't do it, and I'm clearly this sort of catastrophizing the whole thing down to why they can't. And it's like, no. I think as in this skill set, that is something you have to be able to manage, right? To work through.
Well, I've been talking a lot lately about sort of idea testing and proving out before you jump in, before you quit your job and go all in. How much can you risk reduce this? So by the time you do make that full-time commitment, it's not a Hail Mary pass anymore. You have real confidence that this is a reasonably tested and proven direction. Yes.
And that's where the other thing about data, helping folks understand what information they do have access to, what data they can get. A lot of folks are not necessarily data intelligent, right? And so I want them to understand that they can control that. You can, as you just noted, try things and then know what worked, what didn't work. I think that's really good advice. And that way, it's just like we were talking about, with the triathlon. So maybe you start with the 5K and you can work your way up to other things, but let's just do one trip around the block for before we sign up for a marathon. It's not
day
work.
One is not a 5-mile open water swim.
Right. No. It might be very different than that. But I feel like if I can do it, anyone can do it. And I think that's one of the messages we need to have for all of us in this realm is there's no special fairy dust that we get or whatever. In fact, the bravest people are the folks who maybe timing was great and they just went for it, and that's okay. But what we can learn that we can help each other with, I think, is really, it's a good thing to have to share.
Yeah, I don't think I've told this story on the boot before, but I remember the moment I decided to become an entrepreneur. I'd been thinking about starting a business. I wanted to go into this internet, and this was early '95, and I was driving down the freeway near the university, and I saw a billboard for the local shopping center. And it always was the local shopping center.
Okay.
JCPenney's white sale, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But this day, it had a URL across the bottom. And I had never seen a billboard with the URL. Now, I was active on the internet. I'd already been building websites. I mean, I knew, but this light bulb went off and I go, the window of opportunity for a business clueless astronomer to start a company is closing and I need to move now. Like it was one of those, this is the time.
That's
go.
Great. And you saw the sign, you literally saw the sign.
Exactly.
It's a great story. But you also acted on it. And I think that's the other thing is sometimes people see those signs and for whatever reason, it goes away and someone else gets the sign and goes for it. And so I love that story. Thanks for sharing.
Well, I'm going to do a whole episode on the idea of the key to starting a business is act like you're starting a business.
Yeah, that's good.
And after a little while, it turns out you have a business. I mean, it just kind of.
Yes. No, I think actually one of my favorite quotes, which I just rediscovered, and I don't know where it came from, but proceed as if success is inevitable. And I think that is sort of the spirit of whenever I would teach students, and I'm still in touch with a lot of them now. Why not? I mean, actually, Prince put out a memoir. He was writing it when he passed away, but the man who was co-writing with him put it out there. And one of the things that was in there was he mentored a lot of people, a lot of songwriters, which a lot of successful artists don't necessarily do. But two things to stick with me from it. And one was that he loved Minneapolis. He came from that town. He considered it a small town and he stayed there. But the other thing he did was he mentored these people. And one of the artists, Gwen Stefani, he told me, write a #1 hit. If you're going to write a song, why aren't you writing make it a #1 hit? Like think in your head, and she said, I never thought about it that way. And I thought, so this is the same thing. Proceed as
That's brilliant. I like that. Yeah. Don't, if you shoot for the stars, right, you might hit the moon, but if you aim at the ground, you'll probably hit the ground.
Not going this way with it. Right. Exactly. So.
All right. Well, I really appreciate your time. I wanted to wrap up. Are there any other resources that you'd recommend for entrepreneurs, places they should go, things that they should take a look at that you think would be helpful or useful to them?
I mentioned one earlier, the Sacramento Entrepreneurship Academy, and that's one they still run programs with fellows every year. And it's a group I've been able to go back to year after year for help. And then another thing I would just say is do some digging with your own self while you have the time to really outline what your strengths are. And there's all kinds of fun ways to do that. But I think that those would be the two things I would suggest now. And I really love this podcast, Lance. I'll share any other resources I find in the next few months with you, because I think it's great.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. And anything else you think of, we'll put it in the notes for this episode. And this has been a blast. I've really enjoyed talking with you so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for coming on Feel the Boot.
It was awesome. Thanks.
Thanks for watching this episode of Feel the Boot. I hope you found it useful and interesting. And if so, please do the usual: like, subscribe, ring the bell. If you are getting value from this, please do subscribe. It makes a big difference. And share this with other entrepreneurs. I'm trying to help as many people as I can. And the bigger the audience, the more I can justify continuing to create content. Till next time, ciao.